Hey Elliot, how's it going?
Pretty good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. So today we're going to talk about a topic that's been on our agenda list for quite some time. We're going to discuss whether or not we have any regrets that we faced along the way whenever we were chasing our fire dreams. We'll get to that in just a minute, but hopefully you made a list. I've got a few, and some of them I'm going to get maybe a little bit vulnerable on, and hopefully it doesn't make you too uncomfortable.
You know me, it takes something fierce to make me pretty uncomfortable. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, it won't be anything too bad. But hey, before we get started, I did have something that I wanted to share with you, and maybe it's relevant to our audience that people will find interesting. So, I mentioned in our last conversation that I kind of started doing my own research on trying to wrap my head around the whole world of the ACA and premium tax credits and all of that sort of thing. And you had mentioned that there was that episode on ChooseFI recently with Cody Garrett. I think it was episode 588, Navigating the Evolving Healthcare Insurance Landscape. And I had said in our conversation that I had listened to it, but that was a lie. I realized just the other day that I had not listened to that one. When I noticed it, I gave it a listen. And I thought that was a really great episode. And for me, someone that is going to be relying on the ACA someday whenever my wife decides to pull the plug on full-time employment. There's a lot of things in there that I need to know and understand. So gave that a good listen and actually listened to it twice and made some notes. But one of the things that I noticed that really stood out to me was that your premium changes as you get older. And with each passing year, it potentially can increase 7 or 8%. That was news to me. I had no idea that that's the way that the ACA worked. I was thinking about, I guess I always assumed that it was something like your employer plan, where it doesn't matter if you're 18 years old or 64 years old, whatever that amount when your open enrollment starts, that's the amount that every employee is paying, regardless of what their income situation is or their age.
Well, first, let me address that pointed jab that you gave me of the fact that I may not be having to delve as deeply into that super dense episode, even though I did listen to it. But yes, no, it was jam-packed full of information, and I wouldn't have picked up on that detail either. Is and I think Cody said it well during the episode was how much the American system really does obscure how much healthcare really costs, right? Is that our employers are paying a bulk of that cost. And so while it may seem like, oh yeah, I just pay a couple $100, and if you were completely uninformed, you're like, oh yeah, you know, I stopped working, I just pay the same couple of $100. You know, like, no, it's vastly different. And not only is it going to be generally more expensive, now you got to take the caveat of depending on the subsidies that you may receive, that, yeah, it is going to change over time. So, I mean, it does make sense to me in concept of, yeah, the older that you get, the more generally that you're going to be a drag on the healthcare system, and therefore they're trying to make it more expensive for you.
Yeah, something you won't have to worry about for too much longer, right?
Theoretically, yeah, you know.
And after their conversation, I did go on healthcare.gov, and then there's this section in there where you can click to see the plans, and it's really easy to enter your information to get an estimate. And so I went through it. I just kind of performed a test for my own sake, and I was curious based on how things look today. So I'm 49, Lori's 48. There's a couple of questions that you have to answer. And then I just assumed that our modified adjusted gross income would be up to that maximum. I just put 84,000. And then I was going to be eligible for $700 a month in tax credit. And on the cheapest end of the bronze plan, that was going to put me at a plan that was going to cost in total $1,080 a month before the credit, so about $380 a month with the credit. And so that seemed pretty reasonable. Now, I just very briefly looked at the comparison of that plan versus what Lori has with her employer now, and it's honestly not too far off, and I think she pays a little bit more for that. for what her workplace plan is right now. And I kind of made a joke the other day after I learned that I said, it's costing us more money right now for her to continue to work because we're paying more for healthcare. But then I took it a step further and I put in our numbers at 62, just picked a random age in the future. The interesting thing that I found was that we would get a higher tax credit. So 1,656, keeping all the other information the same, just changing our age. And then the premium increases nearly $800. So it almost doubles whenever you're older versus, being younger. So, I mean, the nice thing is that assuming that you get that tax credit, your cheapest bronze plan, that same bronze plan, was going to be $163 out of pocket after you get that tax credit. But if you're not able to get it, so I joked in our last conversation that, well, if we're struggling too much because we're in our go-go years and we're trying to have fun and do all the things and our expenses are above 84,000, well, and I'll take the hit and pay for the premium. I didn't realize that it was going to be significantly higher. So, that's nearly $2,000 a month. So you're looking at $24,000 a year just for that bronze plan, the cheapest bronze plan. I didn't even want to look at what the silver plans were going to be. So I think it's opening my eyes right now to what the not too distant future could have in store for us, as Lori's going to be retired at some point in time before the age of 65. And these are things that we need to really watch out for. As Cody said in that episode on ChooseFI, we often talk about the big three being housing, transportation, and food, but really we should be talking about the big four and throwing the cost of health insurance in on top of it as well.
Our now podcast famous buddy Alan Hansen on ChooseFI, I know he's been pretty focused in on this for him and his family. That income cliff is a very real thing. Like you're saying, $24,000, that's not chump change in retirement time. So, it's not chump change to anybody, or it shouldn't be. But yeah, it is a real deal and is still something that you have to plan for.
That's right. And you were tasked with giving our local group the FI 201 course, which was going to be, I think, on taxes. And this kind of plays in. So maybe you and Alan will be able to partner up and you'll be presenting all this information, and you too will dig deep and wrap your head around this information, even though it may not be applicable to you for too much longer.
Hey, happy to try and understand as much as I can. Obviously, still have tons of friends and family that need to navigate these waters that, yeah, it just still blows my mind that as developed the country that the United States is, that we still miss the mark so much on this particular topic. And it's beginning to show, I think, so much more to the general public than even it was before. Yeah, it is certainly something you need to manage.
And thankfully, there's more and more conversations happening now, and hopefully more of us early retirees, we will continue to learn from each other and how to play the game and hopefully stay ahead of things as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Well, let's turn our attention to the main topic of regrets. Regrets that we have from pursuing financial independence, maybe how things that maybe in hindsight we look back on and think, oh man, I wish I would have done things a little bit differently. I know that you and I probably both kind of came along in the same era of FI, where it was save as much as you can and try to reach the finish line as quickly as possible. People that are joining the conversation now are introduced to ChooseFI and all kinds of other different strategies that they can use, where it's not about depriving yourself and it's just trying to have the most comfortable life, or a bit more comfortable lifestyle, as you work towards a date that could be potentially further off in the future, and your timeline is going to be longer than what we were accustomed to or used to from some of the early FIRE bloggers and the information that we received.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the message from the OGs, so to speak, was definitely the nose to the grindstone scrimp and save where possible. Of course, like expanding income was talked about too, but I think it was almost played a second fiddle to. There were some cases where I think people were trying to say, hey, that's all well and good to make more money, but if you actually can live on lower income and you can save a significant portion of your income, that's you're even better off, right? And we know that there are numerous names on the space that kind of put that message out there, but yeah, we're the fast and furious generation of FI, so to speak, right? Is try and race to that finish line as quick as possible. And there was no real mention or concept of ChooseFI when we began the journey.
No, not at all. I'll start here with a couple of them, and just for a little bit of context, I'll kind of rehash my story and kind of where things began. So I think I really discovered the idea of financial independence somewhere around 2013 or 14. Before then, I had gone through a divorce whenever I was around 30, had gotten remarried a couple of years later, and it was just still in a messy financial situation. I did go through bankruptcy and then foreclosure, but still had a lot of personal debt, like an auto loan, I had student loans, and I started to accumulate new credit card debt, among other things that I was still trying to learn how to just manage money. I guess my first experience with any kind of financial education was just to try to understand how to create a budget. And somewhere along the lines, I discovered Budgets Are Sexy with Jay Money, and he was talking about the concept of net worth. And it was around that time that I created a net worth and realized I was just barely positive. I think we were around $20,000 in net worth when I was about 36 years old. Shortly after that is when I discovered Mr. Money Mustache. And it was just like, okay, we got to do all these things. And I remember one of the blog posts that I read where he was really passionate about trying to minimize his utility costs. I was like, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, those are costs that we incur every month. So how can we reduce our water bill? How can we reduce our electric bill? For a period of time, I was really passionate about trying to run the AC and the furnace as little as possible.
Yep. I was gonna say, did you turn down your water heater?
I probably did that as well. I
I
was doing all
certainly
the
have done
things.
that one. Yep. Yeah.
And so I remember one time, it must have been summer, and I was really trying to keep the air conditioner from running as much as possible. And Lori was doing something. I think we were inside, obviously, and she was busy. So she was moving around, and she's like, God, I'm just sick of sweating in my own house. And it was like I didn't want to give in, but then I realized I'm like, this is really stupid. Like I'm maybe saving $10 a month, and we were on budget billing at the time through our electric company. You know, it felt like I was winning because I was in control of keeping that cost down. But then, I finally realized that my wife is uncomfortable. She's crabby because of that. And probably my kids are uncomfortable as well. So let's kind of throw that one aside, and I gave up on that one. But that was one of the early memories I have of like, this isn't going to work for my family.
Yeah, you realize what game are you actually winning at? Is it obviously minimizing your utility bill? You may have been winning that game, but keeping your family happy, I don't think you may have been winning or scoring any brownie points at that point in time.
I definitely was not. I was getting a lot of like eye rolls and scoffs. And I mean, Lori's always been super supportive with like everything, any kind of crazy, wild ideas that I've tried. But she reaches a breaking point, and it's like, yeah, this is not good. And ultimately, it's not a significant savings when you look at it, especially when you're talking about your spouse's comfort and just your relationship in general. It's definitely not worth that 10, or even if it's $20 a month, whatever it might have been.
Yeah. Harken back to our cheap versus frugal conversation. It's
Yeah.
don't delve into that cheapness just to save a buck and hurt your relationships at the same time.
Yes, I've been guilty of that.
Yes. Well, I too have been guilty of that. I can't say that I was necessarily been super vigilant about the thermostat, but I will say maybe a random house improvements is definitely something that we have staved off over the years, or I should say that I have staved off over the years. Is, you know, maybe something Don has put forth the idea of, let's redo the kitchen. And not to say that the kitchen doesn't need redoing. It's just like, okay, is it okay and functional, or is it, hey, it could be so much greater and better if we just spend a little money. And so that message I think has particularly hit home as of recently, which is kind of scary in my eyes. Is like, yeah, I would never hope that I would hear back like, yeah, some of the decisions that I'm making are being viewed maybe more on the cheap side. But, as we kind of start to prepare our house for potentially new inhabitants, whether renters or new owners, whatever it may be, Don has made some comments of, man, this house, I don't mind this house as much when some of these other things get done, these things that we've staved off for years under the guise of, hey, we just didn't put forth a little money towards things. And it's like, oh no, like, have I been cheap all these years and just maybe was unaware?
I heard one time somewhere, it might have been on one of the like HGTV shows or something, and there's actually a show called Love It or List It where they have their like they're just fed up with their house and they're looking to move, but then the other side of it is, what if we just fix up your house? Would you be willing to stay? But I've also heard that people will do work, or like wait until they're ready to move, until they do that work, and then they're like, why didn't I do this all along? Because I'm spending the money now for somebody else, as opposed to I could have spent the money and enjoyed it along the way. But I'm just as guilty of that as well. I think back to, I have always wanted to have a roof over my deck and my backyard. It's often in the summertime, it gets pretty hot back there because the sun is directly overhead. And years ago, I had a contractor come out and give me an estimate, and it was going to be like $10,000. It was going to be all tied in to my existing roof. It wasn't just going to be like an add-on. It was going to be like a structural support, tied into my roof. At the time, I knew that that was a reasonable deal. This was probably 10 years ago. I'm kicking myself still because, like, to get that work done now, I know it would be like 25 grand or something like that. And he was gonna, he had a drawing, a SketchUp and everything of like what he was gonna do. He was gonna run electric for future, like if I wanted a fan out there or television, whatever. And I was like, no, I can't spend $10,000. Like that's crazy. I don't want to do that. I'll do it myself, and I still haven't done it. So I definitely regret not putting a little bit more work into my own home over the years.
Well, if it's any consolation, Josh, your skills as a handyman are much envied in my house. So anywhere where you haven't done enough work, you can just think of me, and I'm just another echelon below. But I mean, as far as like total regrets of following the fire path, though, I'd be remiss in saying that there have been a lot. There are certainly opportunities where if I look back on my life and my history, I could kick myself that I was like, I had three roommates at one time that were paying me rent. I could have been banking all that money and I'd probably be retired today if that were true, right? But instead, I quote unquote squandered it away by, going out to eat or going to bars or, hanging out with friends or my now wife. But like looking back on that, I wouldn't view that as a waste at all. I mean, I think you have to have that lived experience that you appreciate both sides of that. I think this kind of goes back to our point of ChooseFI versus that OG-fi or whatever you want to call it, of just the nose of the grindstone. Like, yeah, sure, you've got people that, like, we have another friend in our St. Louis area. I won't name them out loud, but they have expressed their own regret of being, I think, a bit too stingy in their earlier years and feeling like they had kind of missed out on some lived experience because of the lifestyle that they chose. And so, you have stories like that. So there's always two sides of a coin. And in some ways, the grass is greener on the other side, but that's not always true also.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if I were to maybe take it a step further, so during that time period that you're referencing, I think you were aware of the five principles of the concept of financial independence, but you kind of, if my memory is correct, you kind of decided, hey, I'm going to live this lifestyle instead. Yeah, that's nice, but it was a couple of years later that you kind of really got more deep into saving and planning for the future. Is that right?
Probably right when I started, it was pre when I had found FI. So I wasn't aware of it directly at that time. And I'm guessing if I was aware of it, I probably would have gone more in that true fire direction. However, I mean, I did find it later, and I don't have a regret about that. Beyond, like, sure, like everybody, I don't think that there's anybody that would go out and say, yeah, hey, if I had made this decision and it allowed me to retire 5 or 10 years earlier, like, why wouldn't I go do that? But it, in some ways, like, I may not have had as deep a relationships with certain friends or whomever, and my life could be vastly different than what it is today because of those decisions that were born out of making what some in the FI community may view as like subpar decisions.
Sub-optimized.
Yes.
So some of mine that I wrote down are maybe a bit more of like I went too far the other direction. And so, like I mentioned, I really didn't find out about the concept of financial independence until I was probably like 34, 35. And I went all in. It was around that time that I really started exploring side hustles for extra income. That alone just kind of like started to eat up more of my time. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but I had started to maybe not, I took for granted some of the relationships that I had. So I was lucky enough that I had all four grandparents had been alive throughout my 30s and into my early 40s. And I was very close to all of them whenever I was younger. But as they got older, I probably could have spent a lot more time with them when they were in their like last like active years, like in their 70s and maybe early 80s. And I remember, having conversations. They're like, well, why don't you come visit us? And I'd be like, I'm too busy, or I'm doing this, doing that, working on houses, rehabbing houses and all kinds of other things. And, once I kind of got to a point where it's like, oh shoot, they've gotten too old to really do anything with. Now they're just homebodies and, they've got health issues or whatever. And that's, it kind of was eye-opening at that point that I had kind of squandered those years. And kind of the same with my kids. I always tried to give them as much opportunity as I possibly could, but there was periods of time whenever I was working on houses. You've joked with me in the past that now I've gone from having two jobs to just one now that I've retired. And that's true to an extent. I wasn't always working on a house, but there were periods of time whenever we were rehabbing a property on nights and weekends that I was giving a lot of my time, my free time, to a house. And I remember this one year, and it was actually 2016 when I bought my first rental property. That summer was whenever I did the rehab. And up until then, we had always gone on a fairly decent family vacation. And that summer, I spent the majority of July and time leading up to that, all preparing to purchase that property, and then spent essentially a month rehabbing it, including vacation time, time off, and all that. And I remember, like, it must have been whenever we were going back to school that one of my sons said, "We didn't take a vacation this year." He was pretty young at the time, and I said something along the lines of like, yeah, I was working on that house. And I just remember he was kind of like, had a disappointed look of some kind. And it just like kind of crushed me. I was like, man, I'm probably not making the best choice. And these kids are only going to be young for a period of time. And I didn't completely learn from that. Like I felt it, but I continued to make the same decisions. And when 2020 came along, it was whenever I bought one of the one of the houses that I needed to rehab, and we were going through COVID, and the kids were home, and we were spending a lot more time together. But I still had this house that I was rehabbing, and I remember same son said something about my weekends just being so like he wasn't seeing me much on the weekends. And again, it was like a moment where I was like, man, I'm looking out for my future and putting, things in place so that we're going to be in a better financial situation, ultimately chasing that dream of early retirement, but at the cost of I wasn't spending as much time with my family as maybe I, should have been during some of those stretches where I was working on houses.
First, thanks for being vulnerable. Like that would be hard for me to hear as a dad. And I'm sure it was for you as well. Is yeah, I mean, I think that's like Mr. Money Mustache talks about, his reason for FI was wanting to be the best dad that he could be, and how the decisions that we make obviously are should be for some greater purpose. And like you're saying, obviously it was to put you in a better financial position to do what obviously you've been able to do. Yeah, it's hard for especially kids to not see the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And so yeah, that is one of the biggest reasons that I feel like I'm so grateful and lucky to have found the movement when I did, and why I do try and espouse it and talk about it as much as I do. Probably to my friends that are sick about hearing about it, or family, or whomever else, you know, is I think the greatest resource that anybody has is time. And I heard a quote the other day that the greatest measure of generosity is being able to give somebody our full attention, right? And so, what greater way than having the financial ability to have the flexibility of time to give that full generosity of ourselves to the people that we care about? It doesn't come without sacrifice. And I think how much of the FI community, especially right now, tries to say, you're not maybe sacrificing anything, or you're not scrimping and saving, you're not living in deprivation. I would say we didn't live in deprivation, we lived intentionally, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come without sacrifice to get to the spot that you want to get to in the span of time that you want to get to. Like you said, since you learned about FI later in life, obviously you already had kids. You still, to get to the spot of, hey, you're 49 and you're retired, and you did that a year ago, is a testament to how the math works. But at the end of the day, you had to pull certain levers to get to that spot.
It wasn't always easy from I guess, a relationship standpoint. There were times when, things were a little bit of a struggle, like I mentioned, whether it was, the little trivial things like messing with the thermostat, to the bigger things where I was gone during the week and on the weekends. I always tried to make myself available for whatever activities that they had going on at the time. And I prided myself on that. But at the same time, in hindsight, I look back on it and I'm like, well, even though I was there for the activity, whether it was a baseball game, basketball game, whatever, it wasn't really one-on-one time. It wasn't quality time. It was, I was just present in the same area that they were. But whenever it was those times, whenever we could have been at home or could have been doing things more together, that's when I was like, well, I'm gonna make some furniture and sell it, or I'm gonna rehab a house or whatever number of side hustles that I did, and I enjoyed that aspect of it, but I probably, could have throttled that down a little bit. And I really started to realize it right around 2020 because that house that I was working on, our daughter Lexi moved into, and it was like, oh shoot, the kids are now so old that they're moving out. And I hadn't even really noticed that time was coming. And then shortly after that, my oldest son moved out, and it was all of a sudden it just hit me like from an emotional standpoint, like, wow, they've already, two of the four have already left. It was, like you said, a little bit of that sacrifice, unfortunately. Thankfully, I think we've made up for it since then. But, those are some of the things that everyone should be, watch out for. But I think that, the message has changed enough now with the current state of the FI community that, it's not the, just push, 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 grind, grind, grind until you get there as quickly as possible. And hopefully, people won't be making those same mistakes.
Exactly. I mean, your words about being in the same place but not necessarily spending that quality time, like that is certainly top of mind for myself. I mean, even my own kids are, nearly, I mean, my oldest is almost 10 years, just about it, 10 years away until they're out of the house. I mean, that is a blink of an eye in the span of a life. And I mean, you really don't have that understanding, I think, until you're really in it. And like, you always get told that. I mean, that's like the most overplayed phrase ever. But yeah, once you're in it, it becomes very real.
Yeah, and I've become that guy that now says to the younger generation or those with younger kids, like, don't wish their life away, or, it's going to end before you know it, or whatever, because it's very true. And I mean, luckily, I'm still pretty close to all four of them, but yeah, it goes by pretty quickly in the grand scheme of life. That period of time that you can really make a difference with them is very short.
I mean, I always go back to that Wait But Why article about the amount of time that you, or the percentage of your children's life that you spend with them up to, I think, age 18 is like 90% of the time you will ever spend with them. And it's even pretty stark, even up to like age, I think it's 16, it's like 80 or something like that. So, or maybe, I forget, it might even be higher than that. But yeah, it's pretty drastic.
I did hear a challenge to that on, again, going back to ChooseFI. It was Frank Vasquez, of all people, who challenged Brad on that, because he likes to bring up that article quite a bit. And he was like, that doesn't have to be the case. He said that, he referenced like his kids are his best friends and they hang out all the time. And I really have tried to keep that in mind. And I think that as our kids have reached adulthood, we tend to look at them more as friends, as opposed to, this is somebody that we need to like continuously parent or give advice to, or whatever the case might be. And it's, changed the dynamic with especially the older two. And that's reassuring, that especially if they live close. Well, one of them's on the road all the time, but we still stay pretty close. The other one is, we see her all the time. But yeah, heavy stuff. We can move on to something a little bit lighter.
Didn't know you were going so deep today. Yes. No, it is exactly that. Yeah. So no, that's good advice from Uncle Frank, as he is known. So yes, that's a good challenge to the audience, is prove the Wait But Why article wrong. And I would say that is my own lived experience with my parents as well, is that due to the proximity to them right now, I mean, it has always been kind of true, I would say, after, my early 20s to my mid 20s, it was definitely feeling much more like a friendship, as opposed to just purely a parental child relationship.
So a couple other ones that I had on my list was, I'll touch on these quickly. And one was that I said no to things that I regret. I think about concerts, And years ago, the Foo Fighters were in town, and they were one of my favorite bands at the time. And my friends were going, and I looked at the ticket price, and I was like, no. I was actually going through. There was a phase on my FI journey where I was like saying no to essentially all forms of entertainment that didn't directly that weren't like more family focused or centered. So if it was just like an invitation for me, or if it was something that Lori and I were going to do, like I was in a habit of saying no as much as I possibly could. And I remember my friends went to that concert, and I've still never seen the Foo Fighters live. And of course, their drummer passed away a couple of years ago. And it's just there's so many bands that I haven't seen that I'm trying to make up for now because I do appreciate and enjoy music so much, and especially live. But there was that period of time where I was like, I said no, and now looking back on it, I definitely regret that I didn't spend the $50 or whatever it was at the time.
I mean, it's hard always looking back, and it's like, yeah, you had the benefit of hindsight, but felt like that $50 was so important, right?
It did. Yeah. Oh, you look at the math and you're like, oh, I could, if I don't spend this $50, or maybe it's a few $100s over the course of a year. I mean, compounding, that's going to turn into what, thousands of dollars in the future. Another one that I had was that I was pushing Lori too much. As I was going along on my FI journey, she was very supportive with that. I talked a lot about wanting to retire early. She was supportive of that. But I thought that I wanted to bring her along as well. I wanted her to retire with me. That was my dream. That wasn't necessarily her dream. And, we're still like unpacking that now as she's continued to work, and I'm still continuing to say, when are you going to leave work? And she's like, I'm not ready. So that's kind of maybe a regret that we weren't having the right kind of conversations. I wasn't asking the right kind of questions. And I was just assuming that she was on the same path with me. That's caused a little bit of like tension over the years as I've gotten closer, and now and beyond that. And then the last thing from me is regarding career, kind of same similar situation. I never really took any risks. I was very cautious with my career. I worked for the same company for 25 years, and I probably could have, if I'd had this better conversations with Lori about what her dreams and desires were, I probably could have left a couple of years earlier. I could have pursued any number of my side hustles to bridge the gap and just done things a little bit differently. And instead, I kind of just forced and continued to march towards that FI number that we wanted to make sure that we hit all these milestones, and then we were going to be fine. And ultimately, I was just too cautious. I just kept doing the job that I didn't necessarily speak to. I took on a couple of extra promotions that I shouldn't have, and just continued to make more money when I definitely could have used our advice back then of 1 year less syndrome instead of the 1 year more.
I'm trying to live our own advice through my own life, but yes, change is hard. And yeah, I mean, there are certainly multiple pieces of that same underlying story woven into my own career path. Is that it's no mystery that the work that I'm doing doesn't exactly light me up every single day, whereas the work that Dawn is doing is giving her that purpose. And like, we could have gone down that path probably much sooner, potentially. And we could have done some different things, and we made the choices that we made, and we live with them. But yes, I would share that regret as well, is sticking in a role that is just comfortable, than as opposed to kind of maybe going after the things that we want more, that does bring inherent risk.
Well, I've exhausted my list. Did you have anything else on yours?
No, I think that brings my list to its logical conclusion as well.
And we use the word regret. It's probably a bit harsh overall. It's just like you said, decisions that we made along the way. And it's just easy to go back to look back now with the benefit of hindsight and say, yeah, maybe I should have done this differently. And they were the best decisions that we probably could have made at the time. And ultimately, I don't think once we were on the path, both of us, from a financial standpoint, we weren't making too many choices that were negatively affecting us for the long run. It was just at the margins, little things that we maybe could have done a little bit better, but didn't know it at the time.
That's right. I mean, we both got to the place where we want to be, and I think happier on the other side.
Yep.
The joy of FI is that even if you were to miss the mark, you're still way better off than your typical citizen. So
Yes, that is so true.
yes. Well, with that, let's wrap, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks, Josh.